The Johto region. The Pokemon game full of the most Pokemon of all time. 100 pretty mediocre additions to the franchise. Are you excited to hear about it? So first, let's talk a little bit about philosophy. When Game Freak was making Gold and Silver, they didn't know if Pokemon was going to be just a fad, another passing whim. They had really hit it big with Red and Green in Japan. They made a big shock with Blue. Then the international releases, Pokemon Yellow version, the anime, the manga. It was an explosion of popularity, but they still didn't know if it was going to last. And that was a fear going through the Pokemon Company while they designed Gold and Silver. As part of that, the 100 Pokemon that they added were more of a expansion to the original game rather than to make Gen 2 its own unique aspect of Pokemon. Just a way to make sure that even if they were a fad, they would hedge their bets and get as much as they could out of this fad. This meant that several Pokemon were just new evolutions for old ones, Pokemon like Scizor and Steelix. So to do a quick recap on the types and the small changes I've made to them thematically. The normal type reflects something that is normal to see in civilization or around people. Rattata, they live in your walls. They're pretty normal. But a Pokemon like Girafarig, I don't see that as a normal house pet. Ground, Rock, and Steel. They represent survival strategies in nature. Ground means that they are very based in their homes, they're all about hiding. Rock means that a Pokemon is very defensive. And Steel represents offensive Pokemon. Next is the Friendship Trio. Fire is the type of extroverts. They are energetic and fun-loving, ready for an adventure. Electric is more introverted. They're Pokemon that are slower to warm up to you, but they form deep bonds. Think an Electrode. If you touch it before it's ready, it will explode and kill you. And then there's Ice. Ice is just super chill. They're slow, they're calm, they're very friendly. Fairy type means magic type. Now the battle duality, fighting and dark. Fighting types are all about challenges and overcoming struggles. A fighting type will always fight fair, because that is how they prove that they're better than you. Whereas dark types are all about victory at any cost. The fighting Pokemon will get a referee. The dark type Pokemon will hit you in the back of the head with a crowbar. And ghost type means that a Pokemon is man-made or comes from science. I gave ghost type to Ditto before and Porygon, and expect similar things to be happening in this video. And now it's everybody's favorite subject, rules! Yay! So rule number 1 of this retyping is that different Pokemon need different type combinations. Now for the exceptions. Exception 1 is that starters can overlap with other Pokemon. They're the starters. They're mutually exclusive to each other. You can't have more than one in a game unless you trade. So if a Pokemon shares a type with a starter, that's fine. And an exception to this exception, or rather a rule for this exception, is that the starters must either all be monotypes or all dual types. I think that just keeps it fair and balanced among the starters if they're all on the same playing field. Exception 2, gimmick Pokemon do not count towards overlapping types. Because let's be honest, nobody cares if Ditto shares a type with anyone else. it's Ditto. Exception 3. If Pokemon have multiple final evolutions, those evolutions don't count. Because if you don't want a fighting type, you do not have to make your Poliwhirl into a Poliwrath. Exception number 4. Rival mutually exclusive Pokemon may share a type. Pokemon like Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan don't matter if they overlap because you can only ever get one, and it creates an interesting little playground rivalry. Like, oh man, I prefer this one over that one. And exception number 5. Legendary Pokemon can do whatever the fuck they want. They're legendary. What's Executor going to do if Celebi steals its type? Nothing. And now we get to the second rule. This one will have much less exceptions. If a Pokemon evolves by an item, that Pokemon must gain or change a type. I do that to make sure that evolutionary stones are more interesting, that they create an expectation of, wow, I'm spending money on evolving this Pokemon. I wonder what it's going to do to change it. Instead of, wow, I used a stone on this Pokemon. Did that do anything? And rule number 3, which is new, Pokemon from different generations only matter if they appear before the Elite Four. So, in later generations, we would call that the regional dex. And as an exception to that, Pokemon between generations can share a type if their designs are very clear that these Pokemon have different roles from each other. Because I don't care what types they are, nobody's going to confuse a Pokemon that looks like Onix and its role in combat compared to Plusle's role in combat. Now let's talk starters. We've got Meganium, Typhlosion, and Feraligatr. So, Meganium is this big, pretty dinosaur flower creature. With the addition of the weather system, Meganium sort of became the sunny day starter. So, since it can change the weather, I'm going to give it fairy type. It's got the magical ability to control weather. It's got pheromones and scents, and it's just generally a pretty Pokemon. Typhlosion is my personal favorite starter of these 3, but even I have to admit, it's not the friendliest looking guy in most official art, at least until later generations when the fire is not permanently on. So I'm going to give it the dark typing, because I think it has that energy of it's going to burn you and explode in anger if it doesn't get what it wants. And then we have Feraligatr, which has possibly the most disturbing name as a feral alligator, but it doesn't seem all that dark, in my opinion, so I'm going to give it the steel type. Look at it, it's got big old teeth. Steel teeth. And I'm sure you might have noticed here, but fairy, dark, and steel are all 3 the types that weren't in the original Gen 1. I did that on purpose, as you can tell by me pointing it out. It gives the trio that bit of zest that I think that dual type needs. Alright, and next up are the 4 Pokemon that were single-stage Pokemon in Gen 1, but then Game Freak decided to give them a new stage, something to really excite the player. So, first off, we've got Scizor. It evolves with a metal coat and becomes Bug Steel, and I think that works great. Perfect, no notes. Steelix. Basically the same thing as Scizor, except instead of becoming Bug Steel, it becomes Ground Steel. And yeah, I think that works better for Steelix than Bug. Now we have Blissey. Guess she finally got her doctorate. All she needed was a friend to support her. I made Chansey Fairy Normal, and I see no reason to change it for Blissey. And Porygon 2, the upgrade to Porygon. Porygon I made Ghost, Porygon 2, I see no reason to change that. So it's Ghosts all the way down. Now for some of the Pokemon that got new evolutions for their final lines that didn't replace the old ones. So instead of becoming a Vileplume, your Gloom now has the option to become a Blossom. Now, Blossom evolves using the Sunstone, so it needed to change a type. Blossom's a happy dancing hula girl that changes the weather, so I'm going to make it Fairy Grass, just like I made Meganium. Politoed, it uses the King's Rock, not the King's Stone. And it also is all about changing the weather, so I think Fairy Water is a perfectly good type. And Slowking. So I changed Slowpoke in the previous video to just an Ice type, so I made Slowking Ice Fairy. So instead of nowadays where you can either have a Slowbro or a Slowking and it's just slight stat changes between the two, instead it's now actually the choice between Psychic and Fairy, which I think is quite a bit more interesting. And it is mostly a coincidence that all three of these evolutions are fairies. It just happened to be that way. And now let's quickly dust off some of the early game fodder. For it, Raticate was already the normal type, and I think their designs were a little bit too similar to let both of them be normal, so I'm going to give Furret the friend typing of fire. And then there's Noctowl, the absolutely gigantic predatory owl. And well, you could easily argue normal flying, because the other normal flying I have is Farfetch'd. They seem pretty different, but I'm a big Noctowl fan, and I just hate the fact that it's normal flying when it's begging for anything else. So I'm going to give it those psychic mind-bending powers that it was begging to have. Next up is Ledian. It's a pretty sad Pokemon. I don't know many people who really like Ledian. I like Ledian, but that's just because I like disappointment. So I'm going to make it Bug Fairy type, because Mr. Mime is a psychic fairy, and he's all about barriers and screens. And so is Ledian. Yeah? And then there's Ariados. Design-wise, love Spinarak. Also like Ariados. But this is just a bad Pokemon. And Bug Poison was already taken by Venomoth in my previous list. So instead I'm going to make it Bug Dark, because it's always setting traps everywhere. Speaking of Ariados, let's look at some of the newer Bug-type Pokemon. First of all, we've got Yanma. And Yanma is a dragonfly. Bug flying works for it very well, but Butterfree is already the old bug-flying Pokemon from Gen 1. But I think their designs are pretty clear that they're not the same. Yanma is this sleek dragonfly, looks very fast, whereas Butterfree is, well, it's a butterfly. It's a big, lumbering, slow Pokemon. And then Dunsparce. I never got why Dunsparce was normal type. I genuinely just do not get it. So I'm going to make it Bug Ground type, because it takes shelter in caves. It does digging. Why is it normal? I have to move on. Fortress! So it was Bug Steel, and we've already used Bug Steel for Scizor, so I need to change it. Steel is the offensive type, Rock is for defensive, so I'm going to make Fortress into a Rock Bug. Shuckle is a Rock Bug, but it's also a gimmick Pokemon, so it's going to fall into the gimmick exception. It can also be Bug Rock. Heracross. In the previous game, Beedrill stole the bug fighting type. But Heracross is around and it can share with Beedrill. Beedrill is clearly this fast-flying, hard-hitting one, where Heracross is very much the bulkier of the two. And of course, there's the usual cavalcade of water types from early generations. So we've got Lantern, which is an anglerfish, which is actually cute and nice. I'm going to let it keep the electric friend type, because look at the little guy. He's wonderful. Now we have Azumarill. Trans icon, love it. If you don't understand that, there was a bit of a glitch in the earlier generations where Azumarill could randomly change gender when you evolved from Marill to Azumarill. Now, HRT is science and not magic, so Azumarill is not going to be fairy type. Instead, I'm going to make it a little fighting bunny water creature. Now we've got Quagsire, everyone's favorite lovable dope. Now it's just a salamander living in the river, enjoying its best life. So I'm going to let it keep ground and water. You could easily argue to give it friend type ice, but ground water is just too perfect. Octillery. Now, Octillery is an octopus, and I love octopus. They're great. They're amazing. So I'm going to let it have the friend type of fire. It's also got that gun theme going for it, even if the revisions to its design have eliminated most of that gun part, but it's still there. And the first of the 3 baby Pokemon. Gen 2 added in 6 new baby Pokemon to emphasize the breeding element of it. Pichu, Cleffa, and Igglybuff are all pretty forgettable Pokemon that nobody really cares about, except for some reason Masahiro Sakurai when he makes Smash Bros. I made Pikachu normal, so Pichu's normal. Cleffa, make it pure fairy, same as Clefairy. And then Igglybuff, I'm just going to make it pure normal, so it evolves into Jigglypuff, which is normal fairy. And then Jigglypuff evolves into Wigglytuff, which is a rock fairy. And now the second crop of babies, which is slightly more interesting, because they are the babies of more interesting Pokemon. Smoochum, the pre-evolution of Jinx. I made Jinx into an ice fairy, so for Smoochum, I'm going to get rid of the fairy part. Smoochum is just ice. Similarly, with Elekid, I made Electabuzz electric fighting, so Elekid will just be electric. And Magmar, I made poison fire, so Magby will just be the fire. There are 3 earlier forms of these Pokemon, you level them up, and when they evolve, they get their secondary typing. And now for some of the Pokemon that would become cool in future generations. Aipom is a cute little monkey guy with a big tail hand. I really struggled for what I wanted Aipom to be. I considered making it fighting or just really anything other than pure normal. I just didn't want Aipom to be pure normal. For one thing, it's a monkey? And I guess they're somewhat normal in the Pokemon world, but how common are they? So I decided to make Aipom into a normal grass type, since they're more forest monkeys. They live in the trees, and I guess you can think of their tail as more vine-like. Next up is Murkrow. It is a Corvid with a hat and a broomstick, real ghost vibes. And since they're urban Pokemon, who live very decidedly inside of cities, I wanted to see that they're ghost flying. Give it this idea that we bred Murkrow as partners, similar to the way that we bred pigeons out of rock doves. And now they've sort of escaped, gone wild, and they just still live in our cities. Misdreavus. Misdreavus is a ghost. It's very spooky. I understand if you need to look away from the video for a bit because it's so scary. But I already made Gengar the pure ghost type. And I feel like Misdreavus being pure ghost is a bit of a letdown for such a cool design. So I'm going to give Misdreavus psychic typing. It already learns a whole bunch of psychic moves. And I think its ability to move items around and cause haunting effects really make it that little extra psychic twitch. And now we have Girafarig. Girafarig is a 2-headed giraffe. That's not normal in our world. How normal are 2-headed Pokemon in the Pokemon world? Alright, we have Scovillain from the new generation. We've got Vanillux. We've got Zweilous, the 2-headed dragon Pokemon. We've got Duo, of course, from the first gen. There's actually a few two-headed Pokemon around. Oh yeah, there's Clink. Clink's got 2 heads, I think. It's like the 2 gears. Whatever, we'll move on. So Girafarig will be Steel Psychic. I'm going to say that its head, that it always talks about is biting people. Like, that's the steel part. The giraffe head is the psychic. It does all the thinking. The little head on the tail, that does all the fighting. And now for more Pokemon who get their evolutions that make them cool. Gligar. So Gligar was flying ground, which was always strange for a scorpion. I'm going to make it bug poison instead, since it's, a scorpion creature. I know it has the gliding part with those, but we could just give it some flying moves. Quillfish. Fugu fish is super poisonous, but Fugu fish aren't really super puffy from what I've seen. So is Quillfish really a Fugu fish? So I'm going to make Fugu a dark water type, because it's inherently lying about what it is. It just puffs itself up to look big and scare things away, even if it does have some poison in it. Now, Sneasel. As much as I like Sneasel's design, this is possibly one of the worst Gen 2 Pokemon, just because of its stats. I think as Ice being the chill friend type, the friend who's, just chill and relaxed, Sneasel is so hyper. I am going to take away its Ice typing, so it's just going to be pure dark. Stantler. Stantler is a deer. Deer are very skittish and scared away creatures, so I'm going to give it the friend type of electric. It's really hard to make friends with deer, but once you do, they can be real friends for life. Just being your best deer friend. Dear friend, get it? Dear, please show me love and support. Like, comment, and subscribe. Now for some Pokemon that are still just one-stage Pokemon who nobody care about. Corsola. Coral is a complex and beautiful piece of life that really people want to look at and explore and understand. Corsola is a terrible Pokemon that is in the surprisingly crowded rock water typing. I think to show off that Corsola is this very unique form of life, I'm going to make it be rock grass type. Mantine. Mantine is a flying type. And have you ever seen a manta ray go flying? The answer is actually yes, they can kind of fly. Some species of them jump out of the water, but they don't go very far. I want to change Mantine to water fairy type because I think that they're just a very beautiful creature, that they have all these friends. They've got almost mind control powers, getting all these Remoraid to swarm with them. Next up is Skarmory. In the previous video, I made Fearow steel flying. I think that the design is too similar between Skarmory and Fearow that at pure looks, you don't get the distinguishing characteristics about them. They're just too similar. So with Skarmory, I'm going to make a little bit of a lore change for it and say that Skarmory is a steel ghost type. That they're man-made, manufactured Pokemon who are meant to be more like weapons. Say that Team Rocket made them as a way to fight Mewtwo, or just to mass-produce powerful Pokemon for their grunts. Something to replace all the Rattata that they keep catching and using for no good reason. And then there's Miltank, the absolute powerhouse of Whitney, who destroyed many childhood dreams. Cows in real life are very unfortunate creatures. We have bred them to the point where there's no way cows can survive anywhere other than human captivity. So I'm going to make Miltank into a ghost normal type to show that we have selectively bred these for so long. Now let's look at some of the two-stage Pokemon. Togetic. I just hate Togetic. I mean, look at it. It's such a disappointment. Togepi is so much more everything than Togetic is. It's not even close. So I'm just going to keep it at fairy flying so I can stop thinking about it. Now, Xatu is everything Togetic wishes it could be. Xatu is so much cooler looking, it's got cool lore behind it, but I've already made Noctowl flying psychic. Xatu is a totem pole. Totem poles are made of wood. I'm going to make Xatu a grass psychic type, which conflicts with Executor, but Xatu, Executor, very different looks. Natu is essentially a flying seed. It'll be grass flying, and then it evolves into Xatu, where it plants itself and it just happens to look like a bird as it grows, seeing the future, paralyzed as it sees the infinite past and infinite future, and is terrified with anxiety. That is the lore, not headcanon. Next is Sunflora, which for such a bad Pokemon gets so much love in external media. There's an entire gym challenge in Scarlet and Violet for Sunflora. They didn't even give Sunflora regional variation or unique moves or abilities in that gen. They just wanted an entire gym based on Sunflora. And it evolves with a Sunstone. So I need to give it another type. So I will give it Fire. It's got the power of the sun at its fingertips. Granbull. In the lore, Granbull is a very nice and friendly dog. So I'm going to give it a friend type. I'm going to go with Electric. Because it looks so scary, it takes a while to warm up to people. Electric Fairy it is. Ursaring. It is just a bear. Bears like to live in caves, so I'm just going to give it normal ground typing. Now for the second stage of the two-stage Pokemon. So first of all, we have Macargo. So fire type as a friend type means it's extroverted and energetic, and I don't think snails are that. But this is a Pokemon, it's a fantasy world. So sure, Macargo might not be very fast, but it really wants to adventure. Don't you just feel sorry for it? Piloswine. It's a big pig. Like a very big pig. Not like width-wise, but tall. So I'm just going to let it be ice ground. It's just digging in the mud, eating things, having a good time. Then we've got Houndoom, this huge, angry-looking dog with devil horns. I think Fire Dark is very appropriate for it. It's a dog, so it'll be your friend, but if you tell it to bite, it will just bite and bite and bite. And Donphan. Donphan is pure ground type, which is very strange to me. What about elephants make you say pure ground? Elephants can sometimes slap themselves with mud to cool down, but is that enough to make them pure ground? I'm just going to make Donphan into normal fighting, which is a type that actually used to have an entrant, but we'll talk about that more later. And now for the Pokemon that have 3 stages of evolution, including 2 returning Pokemon. The first of those is Crobat. From the Dark Flying change I made to Golbat, I'm just going to let Crobat keep Dark Flying. It works really well for it. Ampharos. Pure electric sheep that has lost all of its hair. Electrode used to be the pure electric, but I'm actually going to change Electrode because with the introduction of apricorns have implied that Pokeballs are partially organic, made from tree parts. So I'm going to make Electrode also be made of tree parts and make Electrode a grass electric Pokemon. Ampharos can now have the pure electric typing. And then we have Jumpluff. Adorable, very nice and fluffy. It's not very useful as a Pokemon, but grass flying is perfect for it. It's got everything you need. Kingdra, another evolution of a Gen 1 line. So Kingdra had the distinction of being the second dragon type. I don't think it really deserves it nearly as much as Dragonite does, but I'll just let it keep it. It also takes more work off of my shoulders. And Tyranitar. This was the pseudo-legendary of the generation, the biggest, toughest Pokemon. And it's got some very unique design choices to it. You see, Tyranitar is a dark rock type Pokemon. The most powerful Pokemon in the meta of Gen 1, at the time at least, were the three legendary birds, Alakazam, Mewtwo, and Mew. And Tyranitar was made to defeat all of those Pokemon and Dragonite. Because the rock type killed Dragonite, it killed the three legendary birds, and then its dark typing let it kill Psychics, making this the perfect meta destroyer. I changed up the types quite a bit before, so that whole meta destroying aspect doesn't really work. Instead, I'm going to make it Steel Dark to show that it's very offensively minded. Tyranitar's not defending itself, it's attacking mountains. And now, for a very exclusive club of Pokemon who have more than 2 final forms in their evolutionary line. So we've got Umbreon and Espeon. They're perfectly fine, just giving them also the normal typing. Show that they are normal pets to have. Now, Tyrogue, it was a fighting type, but I've made the decision to turn it into a pure fighting type. Yeah, very original like that. Hitmontop. Hitmontop is this very aggressively spinning top Pokemon, and it's part of a trio with 2 other Pokemon who were both normal fighting in the previous list. And I feel like all 3 of them being normal fighting would really devalue it. I mean, could you imagine that? Game Freak making 3 distinct evolutions, all the same type? Anyways, I'm going to make Hitmontop be firefighting. That friend type to show it's the energetic, outgoing one. It's spinning, it's running all over the place. It's ready to fight. I'm also going to, as part of that, change Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. Both of them are normal fighting, but now I'm going to give them their friend types. Hitmonlee, with its cool, calm poise, is going to be the ice type. And Hitmonchan, with its aggressive boxing style, going in for individual hits, that is going to be the electric fighting type. That way, all 3 of them have a little difference, a reason to use them. Unlike the current games, in which there is no reason to use them. And now for the gimmick Pokemon. Sudowoodo, it's a fake tree. It's not real, just gonna let it stay as rock. Unknown, it's mostly just there to look cool. But I'm gonna make it a psychic rock because, it's cave carvings. Let it be rock. Wobbuffet. Some of the more useful gimmick Pokemon, I'm gonna give them the fighting type, Mirror Coat Psychic down, and it's got the counter fighting type down. Delibird is a penguin. Penguins do not fly, so I want to get rid of the flying type. They're also ice type. Ice as the chill type that's not got a lot of movement and it's relaxing. Mailmen are not known for being these sedentary, relaxed people who don't do much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the dual friend type of fire ice. They're chill and relaxed, but they're also outgoing in a way. They just love to go around delivering presents. They don't care if their present is technically a bomb. Next up we have Smeargle. So Smeargle's a painter. It can be normal, I guess. I don't really know much in the lore about people specifically breeding Smeargle to make paint. So I guess they just kind of do that naturally, which is weird. And now for the legendary Pokemon. Raikou, Entei, Suicune, the legendary dogs. Fire, electric, and ice. Sorry, Suicune, but you're not water anymore. And they're also very magical, so I'm going to give them all the fairy type, which also gives them a distinct advantage over the legendary birds, which I made into dragons in my last video. Now Lugia and Ho-Oh, the 2 real box sellers. Lugia was originally released as part of a movie and was never even thought of to be as a thing that was going to be in the games. Game Freak got Lugia's design, they got its lore, and then they decided to make it flying psychic, which is strange considering its lore, but Psychic they just saw as a very powerful type. I'm going to use the lore to instead make it a water dragon type. Once again, legendaries can conflict. I'm sorry, Kingdra, but Ho-Oh is my personal favorite legendary Pokemon. Pokemon Gold was one of the first video games I ever owned. I remember getting it for Easter from my parents, which is a strange thing to get for Easter when I say it out loud. I'm going to change Ho-Oh's flying type to fairy type, which ties into the Raikou, Entei, and Suicune being fairies. But it also gives it a very interesting balance with Lugia. Ho-Oh's fire is beaten by Lugia's water, but Ho-Oh's fairy beats Lugia's dragon. They're both able to defeat each other very easily, while also being vulnerable to the other. And then there's Celebi. Xatu is full of future stuff, and it's psychic. Celebi is also a time traveler, so I think I also want it to stay psychic. Legendary Pokemon don't count. Eat your heart out, Xatu. It also creates an interesting parallel between Xatu and Celebi, almost as if Xatu are Celebi seeds. They're just what Celebi leaves behind whenever it time travels. For some final thoughts, I just want to talk a little bit about the Sinnoh region, Gen 4. I've had to record and re-record this section more than anything else because it's a rather hard thing to talk about. The concept that every Pokemon deserves to have a chance to shine. Because every Pokemon is somebody's favorite. It doesn't matter if they're Barbarkle, or Yanma, or Aipom, or Smeargle. There's something to love about every Pokemon. And I think that Game Freak should really do more with that love that people have. The new evolutions for Girafarig and Dunsparce are amazing. They're just this love letter to fans of these old Pokemon that just weren't that good before. The Paradox Pokemon, I think, also work fairly well in consideration of that. Often it feels more like when Pokemon wants to talk about old Pokemon, they just want to replace them. Don't use your old Vulpix or Ninetales. Now you have to use Alolan Vulpix or Alolan Ninetales. I don't know why they had to change Wooper in order to make Clodsire. Just make Clodsire a new evolutionary branch for a normal Wooper, and everything would be fine. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this video and my previous one, it's that I think that every Pokemon, with just a little bit of change, could be made relevant and viable. Maybe not in the grand scheme of every Pokemon ever made, but at least in the context of its own generation, in its own games. They could really be something. A fun aspect of collecting them is the thing that you're collecting. Gotta catch 'em all. I just hope that Game Freak shows more love to the ones we've already caught once before. Thank you for watching my video. As I cried out earlier, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm hoping to make more of these. Probably not more of the type remaking, but maybe more Pokemon stuff if people seem to like it. Which, considering the view discrepancy between my previous two videos, it's clear that people do like it. See you around.